Welcome back to another episode on the Carnivore Cast YouTube channel. My name is Scott Myslinski. I'm the host of the Carnivore Cast, the podcast all about a carnivore diet and lifestyle. And today we are talking about fat and protein and ratios and macros and what you need to know on a carnivore diet. If you like this content, please, before we get started, give this video a like, subscribe if you're new, feel free to share it, and also check out the Carnivore Cast on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and carnivorecast.com, and wherever you listen to podcasts. So first off, you might notice this little mark on my nose. I didn't get in a fight. I use breathing strips when I sleep, and when I took it off this morning, it took a little bit of skin with it, so hope that isn't too distracting for you. But on to the topic at hand, topic du jour. So fat and protein ratios. This is something that is talked about quite commonly in the carnivore community, debated a lot. Should you be eating more fat, more protein? Do you have to hit a certain ratio? Do you need to follow ketogenic ratios on a carnivore diet where you eat 75% plus percent of your fat, of your calories from fat, do you need to hit a certain gram ratio, 2-to-1 or 1-to-1 grams of fat to grams of protein? I have experimented with this a lot myself, listened to the experts like Paul Saladino and Ted Naiman and John Baker and many others, and come to a few conclusions. So here's what I'll share. First of all, I think both sides of the argument that you should prioritize fat or prioritize protein have their merits. On the fat side, there are several good arguments. One is that fat is a better energy source than protein. Protein should be thought of as a building block. And up to a certain point, more protein is essential. It's helpful. It helps us rebuild not only our muscles, but our organs, our skin, our nails, our teeth, our bones. And we really need amino acids to survive and thrive on any diet, including a carnivore diet. So protein is absolutely important. And I think that point is around a gram per pound of protein. Maybe you can make an argument up to 1.5 grams per pound, or translating to metric, that would be 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight, or 3 grams of protein per kilogram of your body weight. But past that point, protein really isn't helpful with regards to satiety or energy. It's a really poor protein energy source, and that's why people have trouble getting fat eating lots of protein, because the body has to go through a pretty metabolically expensive process to convert protein from a building block to an energy source. It's called gluconeogenesis. So there's a lot of reasons that you don't want to be eating a ton of protein on a carnivore diet, and you might be better off using more fat, which can promote ketosis, but it can also just prevent your body from having to undergo this metabolically expensive process whenever it needs to make protein for you. On the protein side, people argue that protein is essential. Like I said, protein is more satisfying, and it's also easier to eat more protein. It's a lot easier to eat more steaks than limiting yourself to only a small portion of steak per day and adding a lot of fat to it. That's practically really hard. For anyone who's tried to eat a high amount of calories on a carnivore diet with a high fat ratio, you'll know what I mean. If you're trying to eat 3,000 calories with only 20% of those coming from protein on a carnivore diet, you'd be pretty hard pressed, because you don't have things that ketogenic dieters have, like nuts and avocados and lots of oils. So you're forced to get a lot of your fat either from rendered fat, like beef suet or lard or trimmings, or and on top of eating fattier cuts, because I think even if you're eating the fattiest ribeyes, it's pretty hard to get 80% of your fat from calories. A lot of that fat that you think you're eating is actually removed from when you cook it. Or you have to eat something like raw beef suet, which is hard to procure. People don't want to be bringing it around everywhere. Some people are averse to the taste and the idea of just eating raw beef fat. So practically, it's a lot easier to eat higher protein. And I think the people who argue that it has more satiety, up to a point, I think they're right. So there's valid arguments on both sides. I'd say I've experimented with both. And what I found personally is I feel better on a higher fat approach, close to 1-to-1 grams of fat per grams of protein, or slightly higher, slightly more fat per grams of protein. But I find that I have a certain fat tolerance myself, which is about 150 grams a day of fat, or about 1,000 calories a day. Past that point, I feel great, but only for 2 to 3 weeks at a time. And then like clockwork, after 2 to 3 weeks, I can't digest the fat anymore. I'll start to get sick. I'll start to get bloated in the middle of the night, and not even right around meals. So it's more of a long-term thing. And a lot of long-term carnivores have found this. And even though I feel better on the higher fat approach, I know it doesn't work for me long-term because I get this almost pushback from my body after 2 to 3 weeks. So I have to try something else. And then inevitably I go back to eating, ribeyes and strip steaks and relatively fatty meats and egg yolks. But still, I personally require about 4,000 calories a day on a carnivore diet. So if I can only get 1,000 from fat long-term, that means I'm getting 3,000 calories from protein, which is like 800 grams of protein a day, which is really hard and not ideal. So that's why I personally reintroduce carbs to my diet. But getting back to fat to protein on a carnivore diet, what I would say is experiment for yourself. Try both approaches, and not just for a day or two. Try it for a few weeks. Try a few weeks of a higher fat approach. Try a few weeks of a higher protein approach. Sean Baker is still doing this. He's been a carnivore for 4 years. He's still running these experiments on himself. And he even cycles. So he'll do 3 or 4 days of higher protein and a leaner approach, and then he'll cycle fat back in with what he calls fat refeeds when he's trying to get lean. That's a great approach too. So I'd say really you need to experiment and find what makes you feel optimal. You may find that you can do higher fat approach long-term that I can't. Your gut may be stronger than mine, and that feels best. You may find that it's just too impractical and hard to stick to, and you feel awesome eating more protein. So I'd say really with fat to protein ratios, there's valid arguments on both sides. You need to find what works for you. Both of them can be better for performance, for how you feel, for your health, and for fat loss, depending on what works well for you. So I hope you found this helpful. Let me know in the comments below whether you eat a higher fat or higher protein version of carnivore. Have you tried both approaches, and what did you learn? And what do you think most people would thrive on? Thank you so much for following this content. Please, again, like the video, subscribe. It really helps others find us and helps other people benefit from this type of content. And until next time, please keep it carnivore.